Okay, so just a few comments with regards to what we were talking about last class. Okay, this idea of that there is no singular worldview. Okay, and a worldview is something that is always is always incomplete. Okay, no human conception of what the world is and what it's all about and how it operates is ever going to be, let's say, the final picture. It always has to be, in some sense, necessarily be incomplete. And a worldview is also always kind of flexible. It always kind of changes as well. It evolves. It has to adapt. We're going to see that with the reading. Okay, it's flexible. It's malleable. Okay, whether you want to admit it or not. Maybe you have a worldview and you say, no, you know, the world is the truth is the truth. This is the word of God or whatever. How can it be flexible? How can it be malleable? But in some sense, it has to be. So we're going to touch upon that. Now, another thing that with regards to that idea of kind of malleability, even individually, okay, you have to kind of, you have that happen with yourself. Maybe some of you have experienced that the worldview that you were in some sense, that you were given, okay, that you were brought up into, okay, that largely shaped your initial perspective on the world and your own identity along with it, is something that maybe some of you have had to re-examine or question or call into question, or in some cases, maybe some of you had to kind of strongly rebel against it, okay? So that's the whole process of the camel and the lion and the baby. That you come into this world as a camel, you already have a kind of a template, which is kind of bestowed upon you, a perspective, okay? The kind of your default perspective on the world. And then if you enter, you don't necessarily enter, but if you enter this kind of lion stage, there's this kind of re-examination, okay? Seeing how the worldview which has been given to you, the early default worldview and your own experience of the world maybe don't necessarily line up, okay? So there are certain things that have to be called into question, re-examined, and so on. And Nietzsche says, once you've done that work, finally you're this kind of newborn baby, okay? You're a free entity. You're free to make sense of things as you will, find what is meaningful for yourself. So that's interesting, okay? Hopefully you guys, I'll take a look at the reflections. Hopefully you guys had some good stuff to say. One last thing before I jump into the text, I may have touched upon it last class, is this idea that, you know, the human intellect, the human intellect is a kind of a dual-edged sword, okay? It bestows upon us many advantages, okay, in terms of making discoveries, understanding how the world operates, understanding some basic fundamental principles, mechanical laws. You know, we can develop technologies, and there's a very practical side to that, okay? This mind that we have, the human intellect, enables us to you know, discover things. It enables us to overcome problems, be much more adapted to our environment, okay? We live longer, we generally have the potential for being healthier, we're able to solve problems, and we're able to, in some sense, create miracles, okay? Things that were kind of inconceivable, we're able to kind of discover and create and invent all these wonderful things with the human intellect. And that's kind of, you know, a result of science and technology. One of the other side of this, the kind of the flip side of this intellect that we have is that it also simultaneously makes us realize all the things that we don't know. Okay, it in some sense shows us, if we're open to it, it shows us the limitations of our minds, of our capacity to perceive, and so on. And so we see that there are a lot of things that we want answers to, which we somehow know we're not going to get an answer to. Okay, so that gives us maybe a degree of uncertainty and a bit of anxiety and a sort of uneasiness. Okay, there are certain things that arise as questions. That's what we said, those kind of questions that are not answerable but not easily ignorable either. Those things arise as a result of the intellect that we have. Okay, so the kind of question of, you know, what happens to us after we die, that question, just to illustrate the point, doesn't bother other animals. Okay, other animals are not burdened by that question. You know, Jane Goodall was studying chimpanzees. Mother chimpanzee is carrying a baby chimpanzee. The baby chimpanzee gets sick and dies. And the mother basically carries around this dead chimpanzee for a few days, like a rag doll. And then at one point, you know, goes off into the jungle and comes back empty-handed, you know. So maybe there is some kind of recognition of what happened. But the problem of death is not as acute, okay, as it is for human beings. We're aware of it, okay? We see it happening. We're able to kind of foresee certain things. And it's not necessarily always pleasant. And we don't have the answer either. So for all the things that we can know and we can solve, and we can map out our understanding of reality and figure out things and solve concrete problems, that same intellect also shows us there's some things that we're not going to solve. Okay, so that could be a little bit unsettling. Any questions or comments? Let me see here. Let me open up the chat on the side. Any question, comments?
All good.
All good. If you have a question, then just jump in. Okay, cut me off at any time. So let's get into the text here. Let me go into the share screen.
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, we did have a response for today, but you sent a mail saying that it was canceled. There was no assignments for this week.
Oh, that was I think that was sent maybe to this class and the other class. That was if that's the case, then that was intended for the other class. Okay, the response was on for this week. So I think most of you had already done it.
Just submit it for Can we still submit for those who haven't?
I'll so because of that, I'll extend the submission date up until, like, let's say tomorrow at the same time. Okay, but generally speaking, the due date is right at the beginning of the following class, and the due date is for the responses is firm. Okay, so let's get into the. Okay, no problem. So I'll make that adjustment after. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so basically on the assignment, that the first assignment that you gave us, you told us that we had to give a brief description of our worldview plus all the events that happens in our lives based on the theory of the camel, the baby, and the lion.
Yeah, so some events that shaped your worldview afterwards. Yeah.
So my question is, can one person have those three perspectives, or can they have just one, or it could be just two out of all the three?
I think you can, if you stay at the camel stage, you only have that perspective. Okay, in some sense, if you're at the camel stage, and you never really question your reality, the possibility of another perspective maybe doesn't arise for you. Okay, so then if you get to the second stage, then you can have two perspectives. Okay, you can have the perspective that you started with, but actually no, the second stage is not really, yeah, in some sense you're formulating a new perspective. Okay, so once you're at the lion stage, you can have at least two perspectives, if not multiple perspectives. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then at the kind of the third stage, yeah, you realize that it's kind of also dependent on you. Okay, how you make things meaningful for you. Things are meaningful, like you have a kind of, in some degree, a choice in that. That's what we're going to see with Sartre and so on. So yeah, you can have the one perspective, or you can have a realization of multiple perspectives, of which you have a preference for one. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe this will answer your question, actually. Okay, this getting into this worldviews, fragmentation, integration. So here we go. Okay, this is more of a kind of an academic text. We're really looking at some key definitions. What do we mean by a worldview? What do we mean by the word world in worldview? What are some key elements that a worldview needs to address? So let's basically get into it. Okay, so this is basically written by a school of anthropologists in Belgium. So I just want to draw your attention to this kind of central image here. Okay, you guys see it? The screen sharing is working well, I imagine. let's kind of unpack this image. Okay, this is partly my interpretation, but my interpretation in line with what they're talking about in the text. So we're going to get into some of the quotes, but let's look at this. So we can imagine that each of these blobs here is a kind of a worldview. Okay, each of these is a separate worldview. So there are several worldviews. Okay, there's not just one singular worldview. Now notice also that each of these blobs is kind of they're like a blob. They look flexible, they look malleable. So that's kind of a worldview is something that also is malleable. Okay, it's something that whether you want to admit it or not is something that it changes. Okay, it has to change, it has to adapt. And one of the reasons why it has to adapt is because the world which it's trying to account for is also changing. Okay, so it's like if you have a roadmap and the network of roads is changing, in some degree, if you want to have a good roadmap, your roadmap also needs to be kind of updating. Okay. So now, what else do we notice here? Let me draw your attention firstly to there's this kind of white sphere on the back. So the white sphere, we can understand that as a kind of that's the world that we actually see with our eyes. Okay, the world of empirical reality, the world that we know and we discover through our senses, through observation, through science. Okay, through experimentation and measurement, the empirical world. Okay, so the world that we encounter daily, which you would call reality. Okay, material reality. So you see all of these worldviews, regardless of where they're situated or their shape, they're all in some sense covering or making an attempt to account for at least a good chunk of this reality that we exist in, okay, that we perceive. And you always see that each worldview, again, always has some questions of reality which are unaccounted for. Let me explain that in two ways, okay? There are questions which are, let's say, maybe scientific in nature and maybe observable, but are not technologically observable yet, okay? So we talked about, let's say, last class, like, is there life on other planets? That might be a question, let's say, for the purple blob over here. That may be a question that's all the way over here. Okay, it's in a different realm. It's theoretically answerable and observable, but we just haven't reached there yet. Okay. Another reason why it doesn't maybe fit into the worldview is because it's maybe just not relevant for that worldview. Okay. So, for instance, if you think about your own worldview, the size of the planet relative to the moon and how fast the earth is going around the sun, it's going, 30 kilometers a second around the sun. That's a fact. It's a scientific fact. It's an observable fact. It's a measurable thing. But in some sense, it's not relevant. It's not really an element in your worldview. It doesn't factor into your daily reality. Okay. So it's not that it's unknown. It's that it's kind of, in some sense, irrelevant. Okay, it would be relevant for you if you were an astrophysicist, but other than that, it's not really relevant. Okay. Now the other thing you see is all of these blobs go beyond this sphere. Okay, they all extend beyond the perimeter of this kind of white sphere that we're calling basically observable, scientifically ascertainable reality. That's because there are questions that are important to worldviews, like we said, okay? Questions that are important to worldviews, which are in some sense not answerable scientifically, okay? Like metaphysical questions, like what happens to us after we die, like metaphysical questions like, what is the nature of God? And also like personal questions, like existential questions, like, what is meaningful for me? Where do I find meaning, and so on. So these are nonetheless important questions that are part of the worldview as a whole, but are not questions which are addressed scientifically. Okay. Now, a few things to say about the relation of the worldview in relation to other worldviews. Okay. One thing that you see is that some worldviews have some elements of commonality. Okay. Both in terms of their color and in terms of their place. Okay, so let me try to articulate that two ways. Firstly, there are some worldviews that may have common elements. Okay, so if you, let's say, take monotheism, you might have shared common elements of morality. You might have shared common elements of what you understand God to be. You have shared biblical characters, a shared mythology, and so on. So there are some kind of common elements. So let's say here the purple would be overlapping with the pink and the red and so on. But you also see that there's another element, which is this kind of mixing of colors, okay, on a kind of a color schema. A student had pointed it out to me about a year and a half ago, that the color is like schematically related to its neighbors. So the purple is, you know, closely related to the pink and the red, and so on. You know, the yellow is closely related to the green, and so it's like elements of a worldview are also culturally transmitted, okay, culturally, linguistically, historically borrowed, transmitted, okay. So if you, like, let's say, look at some cultural practices, whatever it may be, okay, it may be a religious ritual, it may be a kind of a culinary recipe. You see the kind of influences of neighbors, cultural neighbors, neighbors chronologically, historically, and also neighbors geographically. In the same way that you're influenced by, you know, your immediate sphere of friends, cultures are influenced by neighboring cultures. And there's this kind of transmission of ideas and norms and recipes and rituals and all this stuff, okay? And you also see reciprocally, is some of these worldviews are completely detached, okay? So in some sense, the yellow worldview here and the purple worldview here have virtually, they have nothing in common, okay? That, and this is something that he's gonna mention, okay? They in some sense, live in different worlds. It's a completely different world that they're describing. So if you imagine the world of, 2,000 years ago, the world of the ancient Chinese and the world of the Mayans in Mexico, yeah, sure, they both live on the same spherical planet, but that doesn't, who cares? You know, it's like not really relevant. They're completely in different worlds, so much so that they might as well be from another planet, okay? I think that analogy is meaningful, that like, the ancient Chinese 2,000 years ago and the Mayans in Mexico 2,000 years ago had no way of knowing each other. They had no technological means of accessing each other, that you might as well be on another planet. You might as well be an alien civilization from another planet. That's how so far removed these cultures are, okay? And you get that, you know, if you travel to another place, you might experience that culture shock and this kind of, this realization that you're suddenly impressed by something that is so foreign to you, you know? And that can be scary, and it can also be delightful. All right. So let's kind of, any questions or comments? You guys see anything else in this image? So there's quite a bit there, okay? And he's going to kind of be unpacking all this. But also notice, again, I'm saying this for a second time, notice the kind of flexibility here. You see these kind of, these worldviews have a kind of malleability to them. Okay, so let's just jump into it. So this is an analogy that I want you to hold, okay? He talks about the difference between a house and a home. A house and a home. A house is it's a space, it's a place, it's a structure, okay? But a house is not necessarily a home. So what makes something a home? A home is a house plus something else, okay? What is this something else? The something else is a sense of belonging, a sense of understanding, a sense of familiarity. And with that sense of belonging and understanding and familiarity, you get a sense of comfort, okay? There's a sense of, okay, I understand what this thing is all about. So now they're kind of extrapolating this analogy of the home or the house to the planet, okay? That we live in this kind of extended house, which is the entire planet Earth. And we live here, you know, not alone in isolation. We live here with other people, with other cultures, people with different perspectives from our own. And we also live here with, you know, plants and animals and other sentient beings. And we have to kind of make sense of this. So one of the things that they say in the text is, we are now in some sense reached we're a kind of a global species. And so we need to have minimally a baseline worldview, a kind of a shared basis of commonality, since we're now interconnected in a way that technologically we've never been before, okay? So this idea that we want to feel comfortable in this larger extended environment, okay, whether it be planet Earth or our sense of ourselves in this existence, in this universe, and this cosmos, we need to make sense of it, okay? Now, so let me just kind of read it, okay? So he says, in short, we live in this world. We thus have a deep human need to know and to trust it, to be emotionally involved in it. However, many of us experience an increasing feeling of alienation And now why is that? Because we've lost kind of familiarity with our house, because the world is progressing, especially scientifically and technology, at a very fast rate right now, okay? That we sometimes feel like, you know, we don't know what we should be focusing on or what we should be doing. So there's this increasing, you know, propensity for anxiety, and he says alienation, okay? Many of us experience an increasing feeling of alienation. Even though through the expansion of society, virtually the entire surface of the planet has become part of our house, often we do not feel at home in that house. And he goes on to say, you know, what I had mentioned, the rapid and spontaneous changes of past decades, so many new wings and rooms have been constructed or rearranged that we have lost familiarity with our house. We often have the impression that what remains of this world is a collection of isolated fragments without any structure and coherence, okay? So look at the world, like, it's like, you know, going to your house and you no longer recognize where things are or which rooms belong where. It's like if your house, it's like if you have amnesia and you go home, or if you have, you go home and your house is under constant renovation, okay? There's a certain sense of loss of stability, okay? Let me try to articulate that a little bit differently and make the point. Is if you imagine, let's say, a civilization, you know, I don't know, 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, like Mesopotamia or something like that. The world in some sense was much simpler. The world was basically, I mean, you're living on the surface of the planet. You don't know that. You don't necessarily know that you're living on, you know, a spherical ball that goes around the sun. So the world basically for you is you know, a few hundred square kilometers of territory between a certain mountain range, which is non-traversable, and a body of water, which is non-traversable. Okay. And it basically remains that way. This idea that there's a kind of a stability, there's a kind of an assurance, and it stays that way for, you know, thousands of years, tens of thousands of years. And then you get these kind of changes, these progressions. So you get, you know, you know, ancient Egyptian civilization with kind of technological increases, you know, literary advances, mathematical advances. Then you get kind of ancient Greece and the kind of Christian era, and you have a worldview which is informed by that. And you know, that is basically informed by this kind of the Bible, along with Christian, with you know, Greek philosophy and physics and all that stuff. And that basically lasts 1,500 years until you get to the Renaissance. And then the Renaissance, everything gets basically flipped over again. Okay, this idea that, okay, one example is everything was going around the sun. No, everything was going around the earth. The earth was the center of existence. And now in the Renaissance, that gets kind of overthrown. And you know, the earth goes around the sun. The sun is just one of many stars. And it continues at that rate. So now think about kind of present day, okay? Even just think about, let's say 100 years ago, 150 years ago, you have, there's no such thing as radio. There's no such thing as telephones, okay? So then you get the invention of radio communication. You get the invention of telephones. You get the invention of the automobile. You get, you know, internal combustion engine. You get you get the invention of electricity. So imagine how that kind of restructures your sense of what the world is, your sense of possibility, your sense of what we should value, what we should be doing, where we should be heading. Okay. And now during just like in our lifetime, okay, I'm a little bit older than most of you guys, but you know, I was born and basically nobody had a personal computer. Then we got like a personal computer, you know, in high school. Everybody had to share it. Now kids in elementary have a cell phone that far exceeds any capacity of any computer that we had. Okay, then you had the kind of advent of video games and all this stuff. Then you have the birth of the internet. Then you have social media. And it's getting, you know, it's like we're always kind of recalibrating. And now we have, you know, the future now is like where we going to go in the future. It's kind of up to us. We can upload ourselves into a virtual reality or become kind of cybernetic. Some of you guys have seen, you know, the whole Neuralink thing. We're going to get microchips in our brain that are going to be able to kind of, you know, in some sense, telepathically interface with our devices and our environment. You know, you can summon your electric car and all this stuff. So the world is changing, okay? And the speed at which it's changing could cause some sense of loss of familiarity and, you know, consequently some kind of anxiety. Let me just give you one more example with that. There's the American basically designer Buckminster Fuller. He's the man who designed the biosphere on Ile Jean Drapeau for the expo in Montreal. And he makes that kind of comparison. He says, when I was born, there was no such thing as airplanes. There was no such thing as air, air travel. He says, then the world war, the world wars happen, and we saw an airplane for the first time, and everybody was freaking out. And he says, now my granddaughter, born, just a few decades later, is born into a reality where she lives just outside of Chicago, and there's planes basically constantly flying in and out of, O'Hare Airport. So it's like that's her default reality, is starting from that point, which for him when he was born was kind of conceived like it was unconceivable. So that could give a little, that could be a little bit anxiety provoking. Okay. If you have any questions or comments, just jump right in. Okay. So let me get into this. Okay, this is also interesting. So what do we mean by the world here? Okay, he says very specifically, he says the world should not be identified with the earth, nor the cosmos, nor the observable universe. The world is the totality in which we live, and we can relate ourselves in a meaningful way. It's the world, it's the environment which is meaningful for you, which is meaningful for you as an individual and as a kind of, as a community, okay? So as I said, the moon, how many craters there are on the backside of the moon is a matter of fact, but it's more kind of trivia for me. It doesn't really enter into my world. It doesn't really enter into my world in a practical or meaningful way, okay? Like what I'm gonna make on the barbecue for my friends later on is more relevant for me. It's like, whether or not the person I love loves me back is more relevant for me than, the size of the nearest black hole. I don't deny the existence of the black hole. It just, unless you're an astrophysicist, it doesn't really have a meaningful role to play in your, in the environment that you meaningfully occupy, okay? So the world can be different there. So you see, as we said, you can imagine the world of antiquity and the world of the Eskimos, completely different worlds. So the world is, he says, the broadest environment that is cognitively, practically, and emotionally relevant. Okay, it's the world in which we live. Okay, but it's not very important. It's not just your own bubble. Yeah, sure, you have your own bubble of your subjectivity, but this world is more than just your individual bubble, because in many respects, you and I, okay, like me and my students share the same world to many degrees, okay? Not in its entirety, but we speak the same language. We're both living, in Canada at the beginning of the 21st century. We have to face a lot of the same geopolitical, ethical issues. We use a lot of the same concepts, the same lingo. We use the same currency. We eat the same foods. We cook the same recipe. So in that sense, we have a kind of a shared world, okay? It's not something that happens in isolation. So you can also talk about, let's say, the world is not the planet. The planet is just a factor that more or less plays into your world. But the fact that you're standing on a sphere right now that's rotating at a certain speed, that's going around the sun at a certain speed, doesn't really enter into your world. Again, as I said, unless you're an astrophysicist. So you can almost ask the question, like, it's an interesting question. It's like, how big is your world? And you can kind of answer that question, like what is the perimeter of your meaningful interactions in this world, and like, how do you carve it out? It's not necessarily, I don't know, it's not necessarily a sphere, I don't know, but it's like, just to give you two very different examples. When I was working in Chibougamau, starting as a teacher, this is now been 8 or 9 years. It's like I was 24, 25. Chibougamau was a town in northern Quebec with 7,000 people, and a lot of the people that I met had really never left Chibougamau. So it's like that's your world. Obviously you have the news and you have access to the outside world, but it's always like something coming from the exterior. It's like many things aren't real until you're there. You know what I mean? So if you compare that to, let's say, somebody who's, let's say, part of the Navy or like a commercial airline pilot that's flying all over the world constantly, your sense of spatiality and your sense of the world and your sense of, let's say, even the limit, even your sense of the limits of the physical world. Imagine you're an astronaut, you know what I mean? Your sense of the limits of the world in which you inhabit, even in terms of a physical space, can be quite different, okay? Let me shoot you another little curveball here, okay? You have people that now are like, addicted to gaming, and World of Warcraft, whatever. There's actually like a thing, like people addicted to gaming, and their online avatar, like that's the world for them. That world is more real for them, has more value, there's more significance, and their accomplishments and their tasks are more meaningful than the world of what we would call reality. Okay, for them, reality is the virtual reality, and for us, so it's like, and then when they come out of that virtual reality into this reality, a lot of them are like, they feel as though this reality is the virtual reality. So for some people it causes problems. It's like, I've heard people be interviewed and they're like, I associate more with my avatar than with myself, so that could, I don't know, that might be a problem. I don't know. So these are all possibilities. So that's what we mean by the world that you live in. Okay, any questions or comments, just jump right in. Okay, moving right along. Okay, we'll try to do this in 15 or 20 minutes here. So he says, we have no choice. This is part of being a human being. Okay, Homo sapiens sapiens. We have this desire to know. We have a curiosity to know, and we have to come up with this kind of roadmap. Okay, and we want our roadmap to match up with the world as we actually experience it. So the kind of two good ways to put it. He says, let me just jump ahead here. He says this roadmap is not, again, it's not something that happens in isolation. He says it's not just a reflection of what any given person thinks. Okay, what everybody thinks. It's a shared thing that involves art, style, fashion, norms, recipes, culinary experiences, rituals, geopolitical context. So it's a shared thing. Okay, a world is also a shared thing. So you have to understand those kind of worldview as a roadmap. It's a representation. You're trying to get your best possible representation of this thing that we're in. Okay. A worldview is a coherent collection of concepts and theorems that must allow us to construct, that's very good, okay? Construct a global image of the world. And in this way to understand as many elements of our experience as possible, okay? We want to, it's an account of, it's some sort of theory, it's a framework by which we can understand the reality that we experience, okay? Hence, a worldview is a system of coordinates or frame of reference in which everything presented to us by our diverse experience can be placed. It is a symbolic system of representation that allows us to integrate everything we know about the world and ourselves into a global picture, okay? One that illuminates reality as it is presented within a certain culture, okay? Okay, now this is very important. Let me kind of paraphrase this way, okay? I had kind of mentioned it earlier. Try to say this very quickly and briefly. Especially if you come from a religion, okay? If you think about a religion, a great world religion is a very kind of sophisticated worldview, because not only does it answer the large questions, but it also has a kind of a fine grained resolution, okay? Not only is it going to tell you kind of what God is and what his attributes are and what he's doing, it's also going to tell you, when you should pray, how you should pray, what you should eat, when you should eat it, how you should eat it, who you should marry, when you should marry them, how many kids you should have, what you should wear, how you should wear it. So a worldview a very complete worldview, it can have a kind of a macroscopic account of the big questions, but it can also filter down and give you answers to the microscopic elements of life, the individual aspects. Now, this is the point that I wanted to make, was if you come from a worldview like, especially, and you have a very orthodox worldview, okay, there's often and understandably a resistance to any change. Because if your worldview has to change because of science or because of some discovery or because of some technology, it's embarrassing. You don't want to change, especially if you're saying, you know, we are giving the story of the truth. This is the truth. Any amendment, any change, or any editing that you have to do within that belief system is, in some sense, and understandably so, a kind of it's kind of can be perceived as discrediting. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, you had this idea, but then you had to change it. So, you know, how much should you be believed in? It's like, so the idea, and that could be embarrassing. Okay, this ties into one of these elements that I'm going to be talking about, fidelity to experience. But it's like, if the Roman Catholic Church believes that the world is at the center of existence for at least 1,500 years, and then they're met with people that are giving them a different story, and the evidence is piling up, you really have two choices. First choice is you try to silence or kill off everybody that is, you know, critiquing the orthodox picture, or the other choice is you have to reinterpret your fundamental beliefs to account for these new facts, the new reality. Okay, but that's not an easy thing to do, especially if you have a very rigid framework. Our very rigid framework does not like to admit of flexibility or malleability. Okay, but in some sense, it has to do that for two reasons. Okay, because the world itself changes. The world changes gradually over time, just, you know, geographically, environmentally, and then it also changes as a result of us. It changes as a result of our behavior. It changes as a result of, you know, technology, our impact on the environment, climate change, and so on. So you always have to recalibrate, you know what I mean? The world that you live in and the world that your parents live in, the point was already made, is not necessarily the same world. So the world that, you know, we live in and the world that a Christian living 500 years ago lived in is not necessarily the same world. And yet it's impressive that a lot of these worldviews, even though they are rigid in many senses, must have the flexibility in order to endure, you know. So, and if you don't do that, then it becomes embarrassing, because the whole case with Galileo is they put him under house arrest for basically advocating the Copernican model that the Earth is not anywhere special. And then finally, when the facts build up, you have to admit that you're wrong. And they formally apologized to Galileo. Maybe some of you know this, but it was like 1994. So it was like 400 years after. And that's embarrassing when you do that, okay? Because you have to admit that basically your worldview was wrong and you failed to adequately modify your worldview to match, in some sense, the new reality, okay? Okay, let me put it this way, and then we're going to go into these two important criteria. If I go out into the forest, and if I go into the park, okay, and there's a tree, and I have with me, you know, an atheist, I have a Buddhist, I have an imam, I have a rabbi, whatever, and I say, what color are the leaves on the tree? We're all going to agree that the leaves are green, because it's just a matter of observable fact. It's verifiably, you know, there. Maybe the Buddhist is going to say something different. The Buddhist is going to have like a smart answer. He's going to be like, the leaves aren't green because green is something that happens in the back of your head in your visual cortex. Green is something that your brain produces. It doesn't exist independent of you. So, okay, whatever, you know, funny answer, you know, like, but you get the point. In other words, we agree because we all see it. But if I ask the same group of people, what happens to you when you die? There's no verification there. There's no experiment that you can do there. So basically, to put it very simply, with regards to that question, everybody can say whatever they want so long as it's coherent, so long as it doesn't contradict their other beliefs, okay? So long as their beliefs work together in a structured way that don't, you know, that don't reveal any inconsistencies. So it's like, if you believe in reincarnation, nobody really believes in this, I don't think. Well, maybe some people believe. Like some people might believe that reincarnation is you are always the reincarnation of a previous human being, okay? That automatically, in some sense, mathematically leads to a contradiction, because at any given time, those numbers don't match up. In other words, the number of people that are dying and the number of people that are being born don't match up, okay? So whatever reincarnation is, it can't be always into another human form if you're a human being, because that just leads to an incoherence. Okay, so that's why people that believe in reincarnation, to make it make sense, you have to say, okay, you're reborn as a fruit fly, or you're reborn as a kind of a pig or an alien on another planet. Otherwise, it would be kind of a self-defeating belief. Okay, so that's kind of coherence. Coherence is, do the beliefs fit together? Let me give you like 2 more examples. Try to do this quickly. In medieval period, Christian philosophers were interested in trying to resolve what appeared to be some fundamental contradictions with God's attributes. So, for instance, how can there exist evil in the world if God is all-powerful? The existence of evil seems to imply that God is not all-powerful. So that seems to be a contradiction. So now we need to resolve that, okay? And they made different attempts to resolve that. Some of them were good, some of them were not so good. They're arguments, okay? Or if evil exists in the world, then God is either benevolent but not all-powerful, or all-powerful but not all benevolent and merciful. Okay, it's kind of contradiction. Another simple, there are quite a few, okay? Another good one was the problem of free will. If you're free and you're going to be judged based on your actions, and you're going to go to heaven or hell based on your actions, how can you understand free will with the fact that God is all-knowing? God is omniscient. You have to resolve that, okay? Because it seems to be a pretty important contradiction. And they made different attempts to resolve it, okay? But if God is all-knowing, that means he knows what you're going to do, which means you're in some sense a kind of a puppet on a string. And if you're going to be burning in hell for something that you didn't really have a choice over because you're just a puppet on a string, that doesn't seem to be, fair. It seems to be a kind of a bad arrangement. So it can resolve that, okay? Incoherence can be like, the Taliban in northern Pakistan and southern Afghanistan, basically in their moral code of conduct, say that intoxicants and drugs and alcohol are punishable, even punishable by death. But the same Taliban, to fund their operations, are involved in the production of opium and poppies for the conversion into heroin. That seems to be a kind of a fundamental contradiction. Okay, so that's what we mean by coherence. Do the basic beliefs fit together in a meaningful, coherent way? Okay, fidelity to experience. I already gave you the example of Galileo. Let me give you one more example. Okay, is let's say homosexuality. Homosexuality appears to be just a kind of a fact. Okay, regardless of the population that you look at, there's a proportion of that population that is gay. Okay, that doesn't cause a problem for many worldviews. It doesn't cause a problem for some Indian worldviews. It doesn't cause a problem for Aboriginal spirituality. It does cause a problem primarily for monotheistic worldviews. Okay, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, because you have a mythology in the book of Genesis where you have the creation of Adam and Eve, and there are 2 types of people. There's a female and a male. Okay, so if you do not fit that form, those 2 forms, then there must be something wrong with you. Okay, some people are born with it's not clear whether they have a male genitalia or female genitalia. Now, from this perspective, you say, therefore, this person is kind of an abomination of nature. This person is the error. Okay, this person is kind of a monster. So we need to kind of fix them or get rid of them. Okay, sexual orientation. And these ideologies, it can be like race, gender, sexual orientation. So it's like that's what you get with kind of Alan Turing. Alan Turing is the father of computer science, was a homosexual in England, almost a century ago. And, you're homosexual, so that's a kind of a problem. It's a kind of a sickness. From this worldview, from our perspective, it's a sickness. You're the error, you're the anomaly, so you need to be fixed. So we're going to fix you with conversion therapy or hormone therapy and so on. So you have to ask, where does the error lie? Does the error lie in this person is basically an abomination of nature and is an anomaly? Or does the error lie in the worldview not adequately accounting for, how nature works? So that's, then you have to decide. It doesn't seem as though that, that we're going to fix you because you're broken. You're a broken human being. We're going to fix you so that you fix the mold. It doesn't seem to have a very good success rate. Okay. So that would be a kind of a lack of fidelity to experience. You're not matching your picture of the world with the picture of the world as you actually observe it to be. Okay, or you just simply deny it. You can also kind of deny aspects of reality. You know, you can deny that the world is round, or you could deny that the earth goes around the sun. But the problem with that is maybe at one point it's going to blow up in your face and becomes really embarrassing. Okay, so that you get, there's always this kind of there's always this dance between science and religion. Okay, challenging each other, limiting each other, correcting each other. You know, a religion and a worldview dictating what science counts, what science doesn't count, what should be studied, what not should be studied, and a science kind of, you know, correcting some ideas, introducing new facts, introducing potentially new realities. So that's what he says. A worldview is always a fragile system. Okay, it's always kind of malleable. Okay, try to do this in 5 minutes here. If you have any questions or comments, just jump right in. Okay, I'm gonna go over this list. Okay, let me just go to the second list. But basically, these are the most elementary questions that you can ask if you're trying to get to somebody's worldview. So these are important for the final assignment, in your interview assignment. You want to ask these. You want to ask these questions in your own words. Okay, and not just these questions. These are just the starting questions. Okay, you then need to have some kind of follow-up questions. You need to dig further. Okay, the best interviews end up being a kind of not just question answer, but question answer with a follow-up, with some discussion. Okay, that's when you really start unpacking the person's worldview. And don't just ask these questions right off the bat, because what happens is you get some people that say, "I don't understand your question," and then you, having asked this question, don't really understand it either. So you just say, "Okay, next question." Okay, and it's kind of a waste of time. So basically, the first set of questions is the metaphysical questions. What is this world all about? Okay, this model of reality. What is existence? Okay, where does it come from? Where is it going? What possibilities are open to us? Then the second set of questions, this would be like 4 and 5, is like morality, ethics. Okay, how do we decide what is right and what is wrong? How are we supposed to act? What are we supposed to value? What course of, you know, what future possibilities for us as individually and as a species are the ones that we should be pursuing? And then the last one is number 6 is the epistemological. So how do you know what you know? Okay, where do you set the limits of human knowledge? Where do you set the limits of science? How are our senses limited? What counts as evidence? What doesn't count as evidence? Okay, so you know, it's like sometimes you get a debate between an atheistic evolutionary biologist versus you know, a theistic priest or rabbi, and even though they're speaking the same language, let's say they're both speaking English, they're not agreeing on the fundamental terms of what counts as legitimate evidence, and therefore it's always it's a perfectly pointless debate. Okay, because there's no way that at the end of it they're going to say, "Oh wow, you really opened up my eyes and now I believe in God," or "Now I'm a newfound atheist." It's a perfect waste of time, because one person believes in revelation as a form of evidence, and the other person thinks that revelation is complete nonsense. Okay, so it's kind of, in that sense, those two worldviews epistemologically are incompatible. Okay, they might have the same morality, they might arrive at the same morals and values for different reasons, but epistemologically they're never going to understand each other. Okay. Now, just maybe one more thing here. Let me say one more thing. Try to wrap this up. Let me take off this screen sharing. Any questions or comments? No. So this one last thing.
Sir, could you go back to the slide before, please?
Hold on here. Let me. Which one was it?
The table of contents.
Don't worry, you'll have the slides. I'm going to provide the notes. Don't worry about that. Okay, so one thing I wanted to talk about was like this subjective dimension. Okay, is you can have all the facts and you might think that you know something, but really you don't know something. There's this other dimension of understanding. So what do I mean by that? Let me give you 2 examples. You can say, okay, I did a PhD in Buddhism, and I know all the Buddhist rituals, and I've read all the Buddhist scriptures, and I know, you know, about the people of Nepal and China and Thailand and you know, Tibet and all this stuff. So you say, okay, now you say, I have all the facts, therefore I know Buddhism. But there's something lacking in that account. And what's lacking in that account is the subjective, okay? Which is, in some sense, even though you know all the facts, you don't really know what Buddhism is until you have that kind of lived experience. Okay, and you understand what it's like to be a Buddhist. That's a very important dimension, which is often overlooked if you're only trying to understand things scientifically, okay? And this kind of what you would call scientific reductionism. If you boil everything down to its most basic parts, then you understand what it is and how it operates. No, there's something lacking in that, okay? It's similar to another idea, which is called Mary the colorblind super scientist. That Mary can know everything that there is to know about color, okay? She can know all the colors and the spectrum of color, and you know how electromagnetic energy hits the retina and gets converted, and how it's interpreted by the visual cortex and all the cells in the retina and all this stuff. And you say, okay, she knows, she's the expert. She's the expert in a kind of an objective sense, in a kind of scientific reductionist sense. But there's something that she doesn't understand, which is like, what is it like to see the color blue? What does it feel like to actually see the color blue? And when you get that subjective experience in some sense cannot be boiled down to concepts or words, okay? So that's the kind of existential aspect that we're going to be looking at, okay? There's something about you know, what it's like to be a human being, the human condition, that isn't boiled down to just kind of you know, neurons or science or objective facts or you know socio-political things. So that's what Kierkegaard says, okay? Kierkegaard says, when you label me, when you try to categorize me, okay, you know, young, old, male, female, black, white, gay, straight, when you label me, you negate me, okay? Once you've already put me in a conceptualization, in a kind of category, in a framework, you might understand some aspect of me, but there's something about me which you're not going to get, okay? And there's, in some sense, there's something about that person that you're never going to know until you actually live and experience in their skin, you know what I mean? That kind of subjective dimension that we all have, you know, we all have this kind of subjective experience of the world, which is in some sense not communicable. But then so much stuff is understandable, and you know, we can conceptualize it and we can frame it scientifically, objectively, and so on. But there's this other dimension, okay? So just basically to say that other dimension is important. You can't really part with it. Just one more example, just in relation to, let's say, coronavirus and all this stuff. At the beginning of the pandemic, you know, everybody starts kind of talking about numbers and numbers of cases of deaths and confirmed cases and recoveries and all this stuff. So that's kind of all very objective and kind of statistical, okay? And it's kind of detached in a way. And then what you started getting was accounts from doctors in Italy talking about like their firsthand subjective experience, you know, their emotions of, you know, we're going into the hospital, which is being overrun and there aren't enough ventilators and we have to choose between, you know, people that are living and dying. And that kind of subjective account all of a sudden adds a very, very important dimension to it. And then people started really waking up, okay, and realizing, okay, this is like, you know, maybe more serious, or looking at it from a different dimension, which was previously lacking, okay? So that's kind of where existentialism is going. We'll try to unpack that stuff. That's it, okay? That's all I have to say. If you have any questions, let me know now. Otherwise,